Hello and thank you for supporting me. I wish you welcome to the Patreon edition of the monthly Einzelgänger Q&A of April 2019. We're going to talk about several topics like Stoicism, Doomers and the Delta Mail. I'll start right away with a follow-up question from ING. He says, and I quote, and I translate from Dutch: if we look at the three pillars of Stoicism, would you consider or state that the modern Stoa emphasized the first pillar more, and perhaps in the past the first pillar was more in balance with the other two? Or is this conclusion a bit too blunt? End quote. Good question, and I think it's a bit difficult to answer because I don't know what all the modern Stoics are up to, although I have my observations. The first pillar I've mentioned in this video is the pillar called logic. And logic is indeed a very useful tool to approach life in a wise and skillful way. That's why I see that logic is very popular among modern Stoics, because from logic a lot of practical wisdom can be rendered. This is important because our untrained minds are often filled with false judgments and destructive thoughts. In Stoicism, it's important to not only be mindful of these thought processes, but also to replace errors in our thinking with logical and reasonable thoughts. An example of this is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a widely used form of therapy that aims to replace irrational thoughts with rational thoughts. The quality of your thoughts decides your emotions and thus your happiness. An example: you failed a test at university, so you think, I can't do anything right, I'm a total failure. Of course, this isn't true, and there are many reasons for it. Simply because it's quite easy to compose a list of things that you did do right. Because if you didn't do anything right, you would never be in university in the first place. Also, calling yourself a total failure is a value judgment, like I talked about before. Because you failed a test, you see yourself as a total failure. But what's a failure anyway? You failed a test. But that doesn't make you as an entity a total failure. You're alive and breathing. So as a sentient being, you are actually very successful. When you were created, you have won the egg fertilization race from millions of sperm cells. So calling yourself a total failure is pointless and ridiculous. Nevertheless, irrational thoughts like these are very common and they generate negative emotions. The thing is, you decide what value you attribute to a certain event. More rational replacement thoughts could be: I guess I didn't study enough. Better luck next time. There's nothing wrong with me as a human being. I just failed a test. That's all. Or, I studied the best I could. That's all I could do. I don't have control over the end results. I gave it my best shot, so I'm not a failure. So to answer your question, I think that modern Stoics are very interested in logic, and that logic has an important role in current civilization. But you can't really use logic if you don't have knowledge of physics. Logic is based on the laws of nature. So to understand logic, you need to know how the world works. I think that physics is as much discussed as logic by modern Stoics because they not only want to know how, but they also want to know why. It's important to know how to ascend certain situations, but how do these situations actually work? One of the most simple and profound examples of this is the observation by Epictetus, saying that some things are in our control and some things are not in our control. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. Now, let's go back to the example of the failed test. In regards to the tests and tests in general, what we control are the amount of studying we do, i.e. pursuit, but also what we think about the results, i.e. opinion. The questions asked in the test, the way the questions are reviewed, and whether other people see us as failures or not, these aren't in our control. Only if we are aware of this, we can apply logic and formulate better quality thoughts. So I would say that modern Stoics are very much interested in logic and physics, and perhaps a little less in ethics. Ethics are the way we treat each other, ourselves, and behave towards one another, basically our customs. I think this is the case because most of the civilized world already have these systems of ethics that are quite compatible with Stoicism, and that there's simply a greater demand for wisdom than ethics. However, I must say that a lot of Stoics are concerned with virtues and vices, because, based on logic and ethics, these are great guidelines to live a happy life. Let's go to the next question by Scythe Austria, and I quote, "As the title suggested, I expected a more detailed explanation of your take on the Sigma male theory. The people enjoying solitude. Maybe your take on the feeling of alienation, the feeling of not to belong wherever you go, the feeling of depleting energy when people are around, and its weirdly explosive regeneration when they're not." End quote. In regards to the last sentence, I think what you're aiming at is the trait introversion. I don't know if you have read the book Quiet by Susan Cain. This book describes how introverts experience the world and why introverts can actually be great assets. I consider myself an introvert as well, although I have extroverted tendencies as well. And people say that I can be charismatic sometimes. This doesn't mean that I necessarily get energy from socializing. I think this is the fundamental difference between introverts and extroverts. Introverts get energy from solitude, and extroverts get energy from socializing. Does that make a Sigma male an introvert? I think that Sigma males are introverts because they prefer to charge their batteries in solitude and basically enjoy solitude very much for a variety of reasons. So at the core, I think a Sigma male is at least slightly more introverted than the average person. When you're so extroverted that you basically need other people to be around you, how can you possibly be a Sigma male? Because in my opinion, the Sigma mindset revolves around independence and autonomy, which includes the ability to be alone from time to time. I won't say that he is a hermit either. A Sigma male doesn't renounce the hierarchy, although he is very aware of the hierarchy and sees opportunities and challenge from bottom to top rather than fear. But when he feels like, he retreats. The feeling of alienation will be more prevalent with a hermit, although I think it's a conscious choice to live as a hermit. So there must be a sense of acceptance and joy in that alienation. In other words, a hermit rather alienates himself or herself from the world instead of the world alienating itself from the hermit. A Sigma male might feel alienated a bit from the people that do not possess the same awareness as he does. We could say that the Sigma male is very likely to be red-pilled. He sees the world more clearly and he sees the hierarchy as a game. Therefore, he doesn't attach to one layer or one place within the hierarchy. He flows through all layers of the hierarchy in a way that serves his goals. The advantage of those that stick to one place of the hierarchy, for example, a group of people based on income, religion, or maybe a soccer club or a village community, is that they often experience a feeling of community. They are part of the group and experience protection of that group, along with friendship, love, etc. Personally, my life was in many ways so far from the norm and so unstable that I've never had the chance to experience this. Until my mid-20s, in which more solid social friendships formed with like-minded people. But still, I've always been a bit jealous of those groups and the advantages that being a group person has. However, being a part of a group comes with a price. There's no free ride in a group, so people will expect you to play your part. Also, the group might restrict you in your thinking and your actions. These are deal breakers for me and always have been. I cannot conform to a group because they always make me feel restricted. I think that the Sigma male experiences the same thing, so he will always be an outsider. He is great at adapting to the group, to the point that people will accept him as a full member, but in his mind, he will always have one foot outside the door. even when he does try to belong to a group, he will eventually encounter problems. This may sound tragic, but I think it's liberating as well. The next question is by P. Manson. I quote, "But what's important according to Stoicism? What does the average Stoic think is important or essential to focus his life energies towards?" End quote. Great question. Stoics aim to live in accordance with nature. For this, he uses wisdom derived from logic and physics and lives according to a series of ethics. These ethics are aimed to live a happy life. A happy life is a life in accordance with nature, and a miserable life is not in accordance with nature. So, whatever a Stoic does, he should do it virtuously, and of course, what he does shouldn't conflict virtue in general. Selling cocaine probably isn't virtuous, because cocaine causes people to lose control over the few things they have control over: opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and whatever are their own actions. Also, your reputation will surely go down as a drugs dealer, which is a dispreferred indifference, according to Stoicism. So, what is virtuous? I've read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius numerous times, and he concludes over and over again that we are here on this planet to work together. I think this is what a Stoic should strive for: being an asset for humanity, helping humanity to progress, or even better, helping to decrease human suffering. This could be done in many ways, of course, and probably it's just in the simple things, like making a local community work, helping your neighbors out, supporting other people if you can, etc. Marcus Aurelius saw his task as emperor as something he was assigned to by the gods. It wasn't his choice, but he promised to do his job as good as possible. Many things in our life aren't our choice, but I think it grants relief if we decide to make the best of it nonetheless. Isn't that what Stoicism is all about? The next question is by Lowy, and I quote, "Oh, where is the delta male?" End quote. I haven't talked about the delta male yet, so I will say a few words about him right now. With the alpha males at the top, the beta males below them, the laid-back omega male and the bitter gamma males considered the least attractive of men, and the sigma male as the hierarchical chameleon, there's also the delta male. I would say that the delta male stands out of the beta male platoon, being slightly more alpha than the rest. This can be both positive and negative. The delta male likes climbing the corporate ladder, he likes his cars, he likes women, but he doesn't necessarily have to be the top dog. He's actually quite comfortable as a beta provider, although he has a bit more alpha appeal than a beta male. This makes him attractive to women in an alpha as well as in a beta way, so he's suitable for casual relationships as well as marriage. The problem of an in-betweener is that the grass is always greener on the other side, which could be a little bit frustrating. Perhaps the delta male is a bit too attached to his life as a beta male, while he's secretly dreaming about being an alpha male or a sigma male. On the other hand, being an alpha or sigma male isn't really his thing either, because he loves to be a beta male so much. So, whatever direction he goes, he will always be interested in what he's missing out on. That's why delta males need flexible partners that like both the alpha and beta aspects and are able to handle his fickleness. I think delta males are quite common men and often portray omega characteristics as well. Because boys will be boys, right? Next question is by Gedankensprünge, and I quote, "Your examples are well chosen, but didn't you forget the most important one of all sigma males? What about Marcus Aurelius?" End quote. Is Marcus Aurelius a sigma male? Well, let's see. First of all, he took full responsibility to the position he was in. He was the most powerful man in the world and commanded the most feared army on the planet. He was at the top of the hierarchy without a doubt and stayed there. Although he was humble, thoughtful and wise, I don't see why he is a sigma male. A sigma male is flexible and moves through the hierarchy freely, while Marcus Aurelius was in a fixed position. He was the emperor. Also, he mentioned in his meditations that he didn't really believe in the human need for solitude. He said that we can retreat in our own minds, so we won't have to look for a quiet place in the mountains. The Sigma male, however, loves his solitude. Perhaps this is because he cannot find peace of mind in the company of other people. Marcus Aurelius does have Sigma characteristics, which is his independent thinking. He stayed true to himself and wasn't influenced by the company around him that often indulged in the many vices that he too had access to. Unlimited access, actually. But he had his own principles and rules that he lived by and was strong enough to do good things consistently. This is a strength that a Sigma male has as well. A Sigma male adapts easily, but he will always be an independent thinker. Needless to say, many people do not think at all, so being an independent thinker sets one apart from the herd. Another Sigma characteristic is that Marcus Aurelius experienced loneliness and the feeling of not belonging. The difference is that Aurelius experienced this because he was on the top of the hierarchy, and the Sigma male experiences this because he is detached from the hierarchy. Next question is by Mark, and it's about the bloomers and doomers. And I quote, "Wait, am I missing something here? I thought blue pill's supposed to go with bloomers, which is blissful ignorance, while red pill represents harsh truth, and it should be taken by doomers." End quote. Good question, but I don't agree. I will show you why by some characteristics from two descriptions I found about bloomers. The first one understands there are forces that want to enslave him, fights it by accumulating knowledge about the world. Okay, this means that the bloomer does accumulate knowledge about the world. Instead of being depressed by it, he actually uses that knowledge to his advantage. Another one knows that the future will be hard, wouldn't want it any other way. So, this shows that the bloomer isn't blissfully ignorant, he is aware of the hardships of life. Instead of feeling down because of that, he embraces it and sees it as a challenge. Next one. Knows he has only one chance at life, doesn't turn to hedonism, embraces hardship instead. So, again, he sees the hardships of life as a challenge. This means that the bloomer is aware that life isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Let's take a look at the second one. Chews up black pills, spits out white pills. This one is very telling. It's a metaphor based on a metaphor. What it says is that he is aware of the harsh realities of the world, but he stays positive nonetheless. He turns something negative into something positive. This makes me think of the so-called happiness hack. Simply put, if you turn a negative experience into a positive experience, you'll be happy. This is what a bloomer does. Next one. Nostalgia motivates him instead of depressing him. So, the bloomer is aware that in the early days, many things might have been better than they are now. We often see that people get sad when they think about the good old days. The bloomer, however, is motivated by the good old days, probably to create an even better present and future. That's why he sees the better world he wants to build superimposed on the dark world around him. So it's clear to me that the bloomer is very aware of the world's dark sides, but he chooses to stay positive. If you keep staring into the abyss will stare back at you. So he acknowledges the abyss. But that doesn't stop him from being this super positive, upbeat, great guy. That's quite cool, isn't it? Although he might fall into the trap of becoming too idealistic and disappointed when things do not work out as he had planned. This brings me to the next question by question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, and a lot more question marks. And a quote, "How do I ascend from doomer to bloomer?" End quote. Well, I've talked a bit about the bloomer to answer the previous question. What we can conclude is that the doomer has a similar understanding of the world as the bloomer, but a negative stance towards it. What motivates the bloomer depresses the doomer. When a bloomer sees opportunity, the doomer sees misery, and so forth. My short answer will be, try Stoicism, because it's not the events, but the thoughts about the events that decide how you feel. By changing negative and destructive thoughts about the world into more positive and more rational ones, you will feel better. And in essence, I think that will help you to ascend from doomer to bloomer. So, I hope you liked the Q&A. Again, thank you very much for your support, and next month will be another Q&A. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching.